Thrown out after his daughter's lie, I watched my husband slam the door behind me. But when the truth surfaced during our divorce hearings, the fallout shattered their carefully built world, and none of them saw it coming. Hey Reddit, I'm Laura, 41, and honestly, not long ago, I genuinely believed I'd finally built a stable life after years of a messy past. You know, the kind of past that leaves you with scars you try to hide, the one that whispers doubts in your quietest moments. I'd navigated some truly turbulent waters, and with Diego, I really thought I'd found my peace, a quiet harbor where I could finally just be. The warmth of the Buenos Aires sun on my face, the scent of blooming jasmine in the spring air, it all felt like a fresh start, a promise that this time, things would be different. My heart, which had been so guarded for so long, had finally started to open up, believing in a future that wasn't constantly on the brink of collapse. We lived in this typical middle-class neighborhood in Buenos Aires, in one of those narrow two-story houses glued together, practically breathing each other's air. The walls were thin, paper thin, honestly, thin enough that every whispered argument, every raised voice, every slammed door felt like it was public domain. You didn't just live in your house, you lived in the collective consciousness of the block. Gossip traveled faster than the Colectivo buses, weaving through open windows and over shared patios, carried on the breeze with the scent of someone's Sunday asado. It was charming in a way, full of life, but also incredibly suffocating, especially when tensions ran high. I remember standing in the kitchen chopping vegetables for dinner and being acutely aware of the sounds from next door, knowing they were just as aware of us. There was no true privacy, no real escape from the constant watchful eyes of the community. The family unit was me, my husband Diego, and his 19-year-old daughter, Martina. From the absolute beginning, Martina had a clear, unwavering narrative. I was the woman who stole her dad. Not the woman her dad fell in love with after his divorce. Not the woman who makes him happy, but a thief. Her eyes, whenever they landed on me across the dinner table or when I'd walk into the living room, held this simmering resentment, a barely concealed accusation that made my stomach clench every single time. It was a constant hum of disapproval, a silent judgment hanging in the air whenever we were in the same room. I could feel it, a prickle on my skin, a tightening in my chest, even when she wasn't speaking, even when she was just scrolling on her phone. I was an intruder in her perfectly constructed world, and she made sure I knew it. Diego, bless his heart, never knew how to tell Martina no. It was his biggest blind spot, a gaping hole in his otherwise kind and generous nature. Her word was law, her desires paramount, and my feelings? My feelings were often secondary, an afterthought he might get to if Martina wasn't demanding his full attention. I'd try to bring something up, a small issue or a boundary I felt Martina had crossed, and he'd just nod distractedly, his gaze already drifting to where Martina was texting on her phone as if her potential need or emotional state was infinitely more urgent than my actual, expressed one. He'd offer a placating pat on my arm and change the subject, leaving me feeling dismissed and unheard. This constant dynamic, this unspoken hierarchy where I was always on the rung below her, was the shaky, unstable foundation of our eventual downfall. It eroded my confidence, piece by painful piece, until I felt almost invisible in my own home. Looking back, that night he threw me out. He didn't just discard me, he threw away the last sane person in that family. The air was thick with unspoken words, with years of resentment and unaddressed issues that had festered in the shadows of their relationship. It wasn't just my belongings he was tossing onto the street. It was my hopes, my attempts at building something real and stable, and ultimately, the chance for any of them to face their own messy truths. I see it so clearly now, the way his face was set, determined, completely blind to the rot that had already started to consume them all from the inside out. He thought he was solving a problem. He was just sealing their fate, and he had no idea what was coming. God, you guys, it wasn't just a simple dislike, you know. Martina's animosity was this constant low-level hum in our house, like an old refrigerator that's always just there, vibrating through everything. It wasn't always a direct confrontation, which almost made it worse. It was the way she'd make these passive-aggressive comments disguised as helpful observations. I'd be making dinner, something simple like Milanesas, And she'd wander into the kitchen, lean against the counter, and say, "Oh, that's how you bred them." Dad always liked it this way, with this slight, almost imperceptible curl of her lip. Or I'd put on an outfit I felt good in, and she'd look me up and down, then look away with a little, and a tiny dismissive shake of her head. It made my stomach clench every single time. It was the eye rolls, so subtle Diego wouldn't notice. But I always did, when I tried to contribute to a conversation at the dinner table, or if I dared to express an opinion that differed from hers. A loud sigh if I asked Diego a question, as if my very existence was an inconvenience. It was a constant stream of little paper cuts, bleeding me dry emotionally. And Diego? Oh, Diego would often just brush off her behavior, a quick, dismissive wave of his hand. "She's just being a teenager, Laura," he'd say, even though she was 19, practically an adult. "You know how kids are." No, Diego, I didn't know how kids are when they actively try to sabotage their father's new relationship. Or worse, he'd try to mediate by asking me to understand her perspective. Try to see it from her side. She's been through a lot, he'd plead, completely oblivious to the fact that I, too, had been through a lot and was trying to build something good here. He'd ask me to be the bigger person, always, while Martina faced no real consequences for her constant jabs. It was like I was expected to walk on eggshells in my own home, constantly accommodating her moods and her thinly veiled contempt, while she was free to do whatever she pleased. I'd feel this heavy weight settle in my chest, a dull ache of frustration and loneliness, every time he sided with her, every time he minimized my feelings. Despite living there, sharing a bed with her father, I always felt like an outsider, a guest whose welcome was perpetually conditional on Martina's mood. The house, one of those beautiful old Buenos Aires homes with the high ceilings and the inner patio, never truly felt like mine. It was their house. My clothes in the closet, my books on the shelf, even my toothbrush in the bathroom. They all felt temporary, like they could be packed up and discarded at any moment. I couldn't fully relax, not really. I was constantly on edge, anticipating the next subtle jab, the next eye roll, the next whispered comment to Diego that left me feeling excluded. I remember one time, they were having this animated conversation in rapid-fire Porteño Spanish, laughing at something, and I just sat there, smiling faintly, trying to follow along, but feeling completely invisible. Martina caught my eye, a quick, almost imperceptible smirk on her face, before she turned back to her dad, her voice dropping to an even lower, more conspiratorial tone. It was a deliberate exclusion, a way to remind me of my place. When she finally left the room, the silence that followed was often more telling than her presence. A heavy calm. Then Diego would try to smooth things over, but never actually address the root cause of the tension. It was exhausting. I was trying so hard to build this new, stable life, to outrun the messy past I'd hinted at before. You know, the kind of past where you've made some bad choices, where stability felt like a fleeting dream. This relationship with Diego, this home, it was my chance for redemption, for a calm, predictable life. But the unspoken tension with Martina, it just poked at those old wounds, made me doubt myself all over again. Her animosity was a constant reminder of my perceived flaws, making me question if I was truly good enough for this perfect family she was so fiercely protecting. I felt vulnerable, exposed. I knew she was looking for a weakness, something, anything she could use against me. I could feel her eyes on me sometimes, scrutinizing, dissecting, and it made my skin prickle. A knot would form in my stomach, my breathing would get shallow, and I'd carry this constant tension in my shoulders. Every time I heard her come home, or her voice from another room, a little part of me would brace for impact. I lived in constant fear that my past, the one I had worked so hard to bury, would somehow surface and give her exactly what she was looking for. It was a heavy, suffocating shadow over everything. God, you guys, it was like the air in the house had been getting thicker and thicker, ready to explode, and I just didn't see the match being struck. It happened one scorching afternoon, the kind of Buenos Aires heat that makes the asphalt shimmer and every sound feel magnified. I was in the kitchen, trying to find some relief by making iced mate, the clinking of ice against glass, the only sound for a bit. Diego had just walked in from work, still in his shirt sleeves, loosening his tie, and I was about to ask him about his day. That's when Martina materialized, like a specter, in the doorway to the living room. Her face, usually a storm of barely contained resentment, was eerily calm, almost serene. It was a mask of false concern, a performance I recognized instantly, even though I couldn't yet grasp the script. She held her phone out to Diego, her hand trembling just enough to seem vulnerable, her eyes wide and glistening as if she were about to deliver the most devastating news. "Dad?" she whispered, her voice barely audible. "You need to see this." My stomach instantly dropped, a cold, heavy stone settling in my gut. I knew with a certainty that chilled me despite the heat that this was about me. He took the phone from her, his brow furrowed with immediate concern, his eyes scanning whatever she was showing him. I watched his face contort, first with confusion, then a flicker of something I couldn't quite place. A defensive anger, maybe? Martina leaned in close, whispering urgently, her breath probably tickling his ear, filling it with poison. Then he looked up directly at me, and his eyes were like chips of ice. He held up the phone. It was a blurry photo, taken from a distance, of me hugging a man at a cafe. My heart leaped into my throat. I knew exactly who it was, and the context. But through Martina's twisted lens, it looked damning. Just a hug. A brief, consoling embrace for a friend going through hell. But before I could even open my mouth, before a single protest could form on my lips, she held out her own laptop, its screen glowing with a series of WhatsApp screenshots. "And these, Dad," she said, her voice dripping with sorrowful accusation. "I found them on her laptop. She must have forgotten to log out." My blood ran cold. The messages, meticulously edited, fabricated really, implied infidelity, a clandestine affair. Words and phrases I'd never written. Conversations stitched together from God knows where, twisted to look like a betrayal. I stared at them, my vision blurring, a ringing in my ears. It was a masterpiece of malice, designed to destroy. And Diego? He didn't ask a single question. Not one. "No. Laura, what is this?" No chance for explanation, for me to tell him the truth about the photo, about the obvious fakes. Nothing. Just a stone-cold certainty born entirely from his daughter's narrative. His face, which just moments before had been softening with the prospect of coming home, hardened into an unfamiliar mask of judgment. His jaw was clenched so tight I could see the muscle jumping. He looked at me, really looked at me, but it wasn't my husband seeing his wife. It was a stranger, an accuser, his eyes already condemning me without a trial. The air around him suddenly felt heavy, charged with an unspoken verdict. I stood there, rooted to the spot, my mouth dry, my heart hammering a frantic rhythm against my ribs, unable to process the speed and finality of his decision. The silence in the kitchen was suffocating, punctuated only by Martina's soft, feigned sniffles from behind him. It was a betrayal so profound it stole my breath. Without a single word, without even looking at me again, he walked into our bedroom. I followed him, my legs feeling like lead, my mind reeling. He opened the closet door, and I watched, numb, as he started pulling my clothes off the hangers, my favorite summer dress, the jeans I'd worn on our first date, the old, comfortable sweaters. He didn't fold them, didn't care for them. He just stuffed them, haphazardly, into black trash bags he'd pulled from under the sink. The harsh rustle of the plastic was the only sound, each crunch a physical blow to my chest. My breath caught in my throat, a sob building, but I swallowed it down. I couldn't break, not yet. Then he started dragging the heavy bags out of the room, past the living room towards the front door. "Diego, please," I finally choked out, my voice thin and reedy, almost unrecognizable. He ignored me completely. He flung open the front door, the afternoon sun blinding me for a second. Then he started dragging the bags out to the curb. In broad daylight, in our nosy, gossiping neighborhood, he was discarding me. The sound of the bags scraping against the concrete, the heavy thud as he dropped them, one by one, onto the sidewalk. And then, the neighbors. Heads popped out of windows, curtains twitched. Old Senora Rodriguez from next door, usually watering her flowers, stood frozen, gaping. The young couple across the street, coming home from grocery shopping, stopped dead, their bags dropping to their feet. The shame, the utter public humiliation, washed over me in a scalding wave. My face burned, my eyes stinging, but I refused to cry. I stood there, watching him slam the door behind me, the finality of the sound echoing in the sudden oppressive silence. I was out. My life reduced to garbage bags on a Buenos Aires street, under the judgmental gaze of everyone. God, you guys. Sitting there on that rough, sun-baked curb, my ass already burning through my jeans, watching my entire life reduced to shapeless lumps in black trash bags. It felt like a physical blow. The shame was so profound, it was a searing heat on my face, a tightness in my chest that stole my breath. I felt dirty, like I was literally garbage, discarded. The way those neighbors stared, their faces a mix of morbid curiosity and thinly veiled judgment, made my skin crawl. Their whispers, though unintelligible, felt like they were branding me with some scarlet letter. And the worst part? A horrifying, insidious doubt started to creep in, a cold finger of self-recrimination. Despite knowing the absolute truth, despite the burning certainty in my gut, a tiny, terrified part of me almost started to believe their lie. Had I done something wrong? Was I truly this terrible person, this other woman Martina always painted me to be? The public humiliation was so potent, it almost made me feel like I deserved it, like their accusations had some twisted validity. It was a terrifying, suffocating feeling, like being drowned in a sea of false accusations while everyone watched. But beneath that crushing humiliation, a furious, white-hot rage started to burn. It wasn't a gentle flicker. It was an inferno, searing through my veins. I knew who that man in the photo was, god damn it. It was Marcos, my ex, who'd just been released from rehab barely 2 weeks prior. The hug? It was a moment of pure, unadulterated relief and sorrow, a quiet acknowledgement of how far he'd come and how much further he had to go. I'd been helping him get settled back into Buenos Aires, trying to be a stable presence for him. And that was the immense, complicated secret I was carrying. See, Marcos had been in a private, very exclusive rehab clinic, one owned by none other than Diego's main business partner, a very influential man here in the city. Me helping Marcos, getting him into that clinic, it was all strictly confidential. If I screamed the truth right then and there, if I exposed the fabricated WhatsApp messages and explained the photo, I wouldn't just be defending my own honor. I'd be blowing up Marcos's fragile recovery, compromising Diego's business partner, and potentially ruining a very delicate financial arrangement that kept Diego's construction company afloat. It wasn't just my messy past anymore, it was tied into their present, their livelihoods, their carefully constructed public image. The stakes were so much higher than just my dignity. I was torn, absolutely ripped apart by it. Do I protect this immense, painful secret? One that involves so many others and could cause so much collateral damage? Or do I try to defend myself in a house where the truth clearly didn't matter one single bit? Diego hadn't even given me a chance to speak, his eyes already glazed over with Martina's venom. He was already gone. What good would it do to shout the truth into that void, surrounded by judging eyes that already believed the worst? In that moment, utterly exposed on the curb, the heat of the sun reflecting off the asphalt, the heavy silence from the neighbors, I couldn't bring myself to sacrifice that deeper confidentiality. The thought of Marcos's face, fragile and hopeful, flashed in my mind. I couldn't be the one to shatter his new beginning, not when he was fighting so hard. So I bit my tongue. I swallowed the truth, a bitter, metallic taste in my mouth, and let them believe their lies. I let Diego slam that door, letting it seal not just my fate, but unknowingly, his own. The next few weeks were a blur of shock and numb despair. I crashed on my cousin's couch in her tiny apartment, the walls practically vibrating with the sounds of her kids and the constant traffic outside. It was a far cry from the quiet elegance of Diego's home. I felt like a burden, a ghost haunting her living room, unable to shake off the pall of public shame and betrayal. I barely ate, barely slept, just stared at the ceiling, replaying the scene over and over. The feeling of the rough concrete beneath me, the weight of the trash bags, the slam of the door. Then, about 3 weeks later, the divorce papers arrived. My cousin brought them in, her face etched with sympathy. My hands trembled as I opened the envelope, dread pooling in my stomach. The legalese blurred before my eyes until one name jumped out at me, stark and infuriating: Martina. Listed as a key witness to my alleged infidelity. That was it. That was the final, ultimate insult. Seeing her name so smugly placed there, as if she were a credible, objective party, not the malicious puppet master who'd engineered my public downfall. A cold, hard resolve crystallized inside me. The tears I'd been holding back for weeks, the silent suffering, it all vanished, replaced by an icy determination. My quiet suffering was officially over. If they wanted to drag my name through the mud in court, if they wanted to parade their fabricated evidence and their key witness to destroy my reputation, then I decided, with a clarity that shocked even myself, that I would drag all of theirs with me. Every single dirty secret, every hidden motive, every carefully constructed lie. This wasn't just about me anymore. This was about justice, and I was going to make sure they paid for every single tear, every single moment of humiliation, with interest. They had no idea what was coming. Oh, Reddit, that moment, seeing Martina's name on those divorce papers, something just snapped inside me. The tears, the humiliation, the quiet despair, it all just evaporated, replaced by this cold, hard resolve that felt like a block of ice in my chest. I wasn't going to scream or beg anymore. That phase was over. This was war, but a quiet one, fought on paper and with facts. So, I did the only thing I could think of. I found a lawyer. Not one of those flashy, aggressive types you see on TV, but a quiet, sharp woman with kind eyes and a steel spine, recommended by my cousin's friend. Walking into her office, the air conditioning a welcome chill against my burning skin, I felt this strange mix of dread and a desperate hope. I sat across from her, her pen poised over a legal pad, and I just poured it all out. Every single messy detail. I told her about Marcos, my ex, and his struggle with addiction, how I'd found him the best private rehab clinic I could, the one owned by Diego's business partner, a detail that had been under strict, absolute wraps to protect Marcos's privacy and the partner's reputation. I explained the hug, how it was a moment of support, not romance. Then, I laid bare Martina's malice. The blurry photo, the WhatsApp screenshots. I explained how they had to be fabricated, how she must have found an old phone or snuck onto my laptop when I wasn't around, meticulously editing conversations, stitching together lies. The words tumbled out, faster and faster, each one a release of the suffocating weight I'd been carrying. My hands were shaking, my voice cracking, but I didn't stop until every last piece of the puzzle was on the table. The lawyer just listened, her gaze steady, occasionally jotting a note. When I finished, the silence was heavy, but it wasn't judgmental. It was the calm before a storm. And my lawyer? She was a damn ninja. She didn't waste a second. Her offensive was quiet, methodical, but absolutely relentless. First, she went after the rehab clinic records, subpoenaing them to prove Marcos's stay, the dates, the strict confidentiality agreement, and my role in getting him admitted. It wasn't about exposing his past to the world, but proving the context of that photo, and why I'd been so desperate to keep it secret. Then she went for the digital evidence. Old phone backups, cloud storage, my laptop history. Anything that could prove Martina's fabricated messages were indeed fabrications. But here's the kicker, the real genius move. She subpoenaed Martina's own social media accounts. You guys, the feeling when my lawyer called me to say they'd found it, buried deep in private DMs with her best friend, Martina had been practically bragging about finally getting rid of the witch. She detailed how she was going to make Dad see the light and get that gold digger out of our house. It was all there, in black and white, her own words, her own malicious intent laid bare. It was sickening, but also so incredibly vindicating. The anger I'd suppressed for weeks, it finally had a target. Going to court felt surreal, like stepping into a bad dream. The fluorescent lights of the Buenos Aires courthouse were harsh, casting long shadows, and the air smelled faintly of old paper, dust, and nervous sweat. It felt like everyone was against me. Diego's lawyer, a slick, condescending man in a perfectly tailored suit, painted me as a manipulative gold digger, a woman with a checkered past who had preyed on a grieving widower. He twisted every single thing I'd done, every attempt at building a life, into evidence of my supposed cunning. My face burned, my fists clenched under the table, but my lawyer had told me to stay calm, to not react. And Martina? Oh, Martina put on an Oscar-worthy performance. She'd sit there looking so innocent, her eyes wide and glistening, dabbing at fake tears with a tissue, whispering about her poor father and how I'd broken his heart. It was infuriating to watch, this carefully constructed facade of victimhood. The judge, a stern-faced man who looked like he'd seen it all, seemed impatient, ready to dismiss it all as just another messy, acrimonious divorce. I could feel his gaze, dismissive, probably thinking I was just another bitter ex-wife trying to get more money. The uphill battle felt insurmountable, a heavy weight pressing down on my chest. Every word they uttered felt like a fresh stab, and I had to bite the inside of my cheek to keep from screaming. But then came the unexpected turn. My lawyer's digital expert, a quiet, intense guy with thick glasses, took the stand. He didn't just prove Martina's cheating screenshots were altered. That was almost a given, we knew that. But he found something else, buried deep in the file history of her laptop, in a folder she thought was deleted. It was like he'd unearthed a hidden chamber. Conversations not just between Martina and her friend, but with Diego's accountant. Conversations where Martina had been explicitly pressuring Diego to put the house, our house, and one of his rental properties solely in her name before the divorce got ugly. She'd argued that it would protect his assets from me, but it was clear as day what her real game was. She hadn't just framed me, she'd been meticulously planning his financial ruin too, all under the guise of protecting him. My jaw actually dropped. I looked at Diego, whose face had gone from smug to utterly bewildered. He looked like he'd been slapped. The air in the courtroom shifted, a cold breeze of dawning realization sweeping through. Martina, who'd been looking so smug, suddenly looked like a deer in headlights, her carefully constructed mask slipping. The climax. You guys, it was something out of a movie. In the final, tense hearing, the courtroom was packed, everyone buzzing with anticipation. You could feel the tension radiating off the walls. My lawyer called her digital expert back to the stand. He projected something onto the screen, and the judge leaned forward, his usual impassive face showing a flicker of interest. My lawyer then played it, a recording. It was Martina's voice, extracted from her own cloud backups, a private voice message to her friend, her voice clear as day, laughing. "Dad will sign anything when he's angry," she cackled, a chilling, malicious sound. "He's so pissed off at her, I told him to put everything in my name, to protect it. He's so dumb, he'll do it. I'll make sure he never sees a cent if that witch tries to fight back." The words hung in the air, echoing through the silent courtroom. My breath hitched. The sound of her laughter, so confident, so cruel, was deafening in the sudden, absolute silence. Not a single person moved. Diego's face, which had been a picture of smug confidence just moments before, went absolutely terrifyingly white. It was like all the blood had drained out of him. His eyes, wide with horror, darted from the screen to Martina, who looked like she was about to vomit. The judge, his expression now unreadable, slowly, deliberately, turned his head to look at Diego. And just like that, the carefully built world of lies and manipulation that Diego had so blindly enabled shattered into a million pieces. The sound of that gavel, when it finally came down, felt like an earthquake. The silence in that courtroom after Martina's cackling voice filled the air. It wasn't just quiet, it was deafening. It pressed in on my ears, a physical weight that made my head feel light. My heart, which had been pounding like a drum against my ribs through the entire trial, seemed to seize up, then started a slow, heavy thrum that vibrated through my whole body. I remember watching Diego's face. The blood had completely drained from it, leaving him looking like a ghost, all his smugness evaporated into pure, unadulterated horror. His eyes, wide and unseeing, darted from the screen where his daughter's cruel laughter had just played, to Martina herself, who was now bright red, her mouth open in a silent gasp, as if she couldn't breathe. The mask she'd worn for weeks, the innocent, sorrowful victim, was utterly shattered, revealing the venomous core beneath. The collective gasp from the gallery, the rustle of papers, the creak of a chair, it all ceased. Even the judge, who'd maintained such a stoic, almost bored expression throughout, leaned back slowly in his seat, his gaze piercing, first on Martina, then settling, heavy and condemning, on Diego. It was a moment of absolute, unadulterated truth, stark and brutal, laid bare for everyone to see. The air crackled with it, a cold, hard clarity that cut through all the lies. As the dust began to settle, as the lawyers started buzzing again and the judge called for order, a strange, hollow feeling started to creep in. I had won, hadn't I? I'd gotten my vindication, seen their carefully constructed world implode right before my eyes. But sitting there, the adrenaline slowly draining from my system, I started to wonder, did I do the right thing? By exposing everything, by essentially detonating their lives in such a public, devastating way, had I crossed a line? Was this truly justice, or had I simply become as ruthless, as vindictive, as the very people who'd tried to destroy me? The image of Diego's utterly shattered face, Martina's humiliation, it didn't bring the pure, unadulterated satisfaction I thought it would. Instead, there was this unsettling emptiness, a chill that seeped into my bones. A small, insidious voice whispered, "You're no better than them." It felt like I'd just participated in a public execution, even if the victims were the ones who had first tried to bury me alive. The weight of their shattered existence, even if self-inflicted, felt strangely heavy on my shoulders. God, the cost of it all. I had to reveal parts of my past I wanted to keep buried forever. Parts that still brought a sting of shame and vulnerability. Talking about Marcos, about his addiction, about the private rehab and Diego's business partner, it felt like peeling off a scab, exposing raw flesh to the world. Every word was a fresh wound, every detail dragged into the light for public consumption. The public spectacle, the endless court dates, the constant anxiety that gnawed at my stomach, leaving me sleepless and wired for weeks. The emotional toll was immense. My body felt wrung out, my voice hoarse from the tension I'd held in my throat. But then, as I watched Martina squirm, as I saw Diego's carefully cultivated image of the good, honorable man crumble, a grim, undeniable satisfaction did surface. It was cold, yes, almost bitter, but it was there. A tightening in my gut, a fleeting, vindictive thought. You deserve this. Every single bit of it. Seeing their carefully polished facade implode, especially Martina's, that entitled smirk wiped clean by pure terror, it was a moment of dark, quiet triumph. It wasn't a joyous feeling, not really. More like a deep, resonant thud of finality, the sound of a heavy truth finally hitting the ground. But as I drove away from the courthouse that day, the Buenos Aires traffic a blur outside the taxi window, I started to process it differently. This wasn't just about revenge, I realized. It was about reclaiming my narrative. It was about that moment on the curb, watching my life being reduced to garbage bags, feeling like a disposable object. It was about proving that I wouldn't be a convenient scapegoat for their dysfunction, that I wouldn't let them rewrite my story with their lies. I had been silenced, dismissed, and publicly shamed. This was my voice, finally, unequivocally heard. It was about finally forcing the truth to surface, even if that truth was messy and painful and ripped open old wounds. It was about dignity, about saying, "You do not get to define me, you do not get to destroy me." It was a desperate, primal need to stand up for myself after years of feeling invisible and secondary in that house. I had to do it. For myself, for the part of me that had almost started to believe their accusations. In the end, I didn't destroy their world. That's what I kept telling myself, what I truly believe now. Their world, that carefully constructed edifice of lies and self-deception, was already rotting from the inside out. I just turned on the lights. I pulled back the curtains and let the harsh, unforgiving light of truth flood every dark corner, exposing the rot that had been festering there all along. The entitlement, the manipulation, the blind spots, the casual cruelty, it was all there, hidden beneath a veneer of respectability. I didn't create the poison. I merely uncorked the bottle and let everyone, especially Diego, finally smell the stench. And in doing so, I didn't just expose them. I freed myself. I finally stepped out of that suffocating shadow, even if it meant walking through fire to get there. The judge, his face now a mask of stern disapproval, didn't mince words. He dismissed all the ridiculous accusations against me, a decisive wave of his hand sweeping away months of Martina's venom and Diego's blind faith. It was like a physical weight lifting off my chest, a gasp of pure relief I didn't even realize I'd been holding. The air in the courtroom, which had felt so heavy and suffocating for so long, suddenly felt lighter, breathable. I remember the thud of the gavel, not a dramatic boom like in movies, but a sharp, final crack that echoed through the silence, sealing the fate of their carefully constructed world. It was over. I was free. Martina, Diego's perfect daughter, was suddenly facing a very real, very ugly investigation into possible fraud on her part. Her carefully laid plans to siphon off Diego's assets? Frozen. The judge saw right through her, and the property transfers she'd pushed for were immediately halted, pending a full, thorough review. Her reputation, the one she'd guarded so fiercely, the one she used as a weapon against me, was in absolute tatters. I heard whispers, even from my cousin, that her friends had dropped her like hot potatoes after her DMs came out. The constant, malicious smirk I'd grown so accustomed to seeing on her face was gone, replaced by a hollow, terrified look. It felt strangely quiet. Not triumphant, not exactly, but a deep, settled calm, like watching a storm finally dissipate. There was no joy in her downfall, just a weary satisfaction that the truth had finally found its mark. And Diego. Oh, Diego, the man who'd thrown me out into the street without a second thought, who'd believed every single lie his daughter spun, who'd enabled her cruelty without batting an eye. He ended up alone. Alone in that big, empty house, the one I'd tried so hard to make a home, now a monument to his blindness and denial. The judge ordered him to pay my significant court costs, which, let me tell you, were not insignificant, and a surprisingly generous settlement. All because of the lies he had so blindly supported, because of the monster he'd allowed his daughter to become. The irony, you guys, is thick enough to cut with a knife. He wanted to protect his daughter, and she was the one who undid him completely, destroying his finances and his reputation faster than any gold digger ever could. I pictured him in that house, the silence deafening, perhaps finally understanding the depth of Martina's betrayal, the cost of his own negligence. The thought was chilling, but also, in a strange way, incredibly just. I didn't get my marriage back, obviously. And honestly, as the weeks turned into months, as the legal dust settled and I started rebuilding my own life, finding a small apartment with a tiny balcony that gets the morning sun, I realized I didn't want it. That toxic environment, the constant walking on eggshells, the feeling of being perpetually second best to a manipulative teenager. It wasn't a marriage. It was a prison built on his denial and her manipulation, and I was the one constantly gasping for air. The thought of going back, even if I could, made my stomach clench, a knot of revulsion tightening in my gut. I felt a lightness I hadn't realized I'd lost, like shedding a heavy, suffocating cloak I'd been forced to wear for years. The air tasted cleaner. My steps felt surer. For the first time in a long time, I felt truly, unequivocally free. Free to define my own life, on my own terms, without their shadows looming over me. So Reddit, after everything I went through, after being thrown out with my life reduced to trash bags on a Buenos Aires street, after fighting back with every single ounce of strength and truth I had, for myself and for the dignity I almost lost, Ada for how I handled things, or was this the only way to get true justice and finally stand up for myself? I really need an outside perspective.